Hey, man, come on out here.
I ain't coming nowhere.
Where's our officer at? You got a hostage.
Yeah.
What do you got a hostage for? What's going on?
Don't tell me that way, man. I got one shot.
A peaceful home in suburban Stockbridge suddenly turns into the scene of a horrific tragedy. A pregnant woman is murdered. Her 16-year-old nephew is shot dead. And the killer, the man they once trusted, had planned it all in chilling silence before taking his own life. But the real story doesn't end there. As the investigation unfolds, shocking truths are revealed. A broken legal system, a failure to act, and the deadly silence of domestic abuse. Watch this gripping story to discover why what seemed like a sudden crime was in fact a ticking time bomb, silently counting down. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for exclusive content and unlock special perks for our earliest followers.
Henry County 911
Can you please call please?
Sandy.
He's in the garage. Is he breathing, please?
He's in the garage?
I can see him, ma'am. His blood all over the driveway.
On a quiet April morning, soft sunlight filtered through the trees of Stockbridge, Georgia, peaceful neighborhood untouched by tragedy. Everything seemed calm and ordinary. But then, a piercing scream over a 911 call shattered that stillness like glass. A woman's voice, trembling and desperate, echoed through the dispatcher's headset. "Please, someone, help! There's blood pouring out of my sister's garage." That voice belonged to Anetria, the younger sister of Sandra White. She was calling in utter panic after witnessing something that shook her to the core. Anetria had stopped by to check on her sister after days of unanswered calls and messages. A few days earlier, during a casual visit, she'd noticed something strange. Anthony, Sandra's boyfriend, was sitting in the living room in complete silence. His eyes were fixed on the TV, but his expression was blank, distant, as if his mind were lost in a storm only he could see. It was then that Anetria felt an unsettling chill. Anthony was always a quiet man, but this time his silence felt wrong. He didn't greet her, didn't even look up. Just a heavy, suffocating tension that hung in the air like a warning. That morning, walking up the familiar driveway, Anetria sensed something was off. There was no music playing from Sandra's kitchen like usual. No laughter from Aaron, her teenage nephew who always greeted her with excitement. Just a cold, eerie silence. And then she saw the dark red trail of blood seeping from beneath the garage door, snaking its way out onto the concrete like a silent scream. Peering through a small window, she caught a glimpse of a body lying motionless, slumped over, dark hair matted with blood. Anetria collapsed, her heart breaking. She couldn't even tell who it was. But the dread that something horrible had happened was undeniable. "I can't get in. The door's locked. Is anyone there? Please!" she sobbed, barely able to breathe. The dispatcher urged her to back away from the house and wait for police. But for Anetria, every second stretched into a never-ending nightmare, and somewhere inside that home, in the shadows, someone was already prepared to turn it into a house of death. The first police cruiser rolled slowly into the quiet suburb of Stockbridge. Its lights flashed across the dewy morning haze, casting streaks of red and blue on the pavement. Officer Shannon Foster was the first to arrive on scene. As he stepped out of the vehicle, everything around him seemed normal. Until he got closer to the garage of house number 1145. Suddenly, the air felt heavy. Too heavy. Blood. A dark, dried trail began at the edge of the garage door, weaving through the concrete cracks and spilling out onto the driveway. There were no screams, no cries for help, only a chilling silence that cloaked the house like a shroud. Foster froze for a moment, a cold shiver racing down his spine. No one had to say this instincts, sharpened by years in uniform, screamed that something was terribly wrong inside. The central figure in this tragedy was Sandra White, a 39-year-old woman known throughout her community, not just as a resident, but as a beloved elementary school teacher. Students called her the teacher with the springtime heart because of her soft voice, warm eyes, and unwavering encouragement for even the most troubled kids. She was the kind of teacher who stayed after class to help, who remembered every child's birthday, and who never raised her voice. But Sandra wasn't just a dedicated educator, she was also pregnant. Her first son, Antonio, was due to arrive at the end of April, and she had been joyfully preparing for his birth. Also living in the house was her 16-year-old nephew, Aaron White. A rising star on his high school football team, Aaron was bright, determined, and full of life. Just a week earlier, he'd proudly told Sandra about a college tour he'd taken, dreaming of studying behavioral psychology while playing sports. Aaron wore his team's badge proudly on his backpack, and everyone who knew him said the same thing. This kid was going places. The third person tied to the house was Anthony Bailey Jr., 47, Sandra's boyfriend. He'd lived with her for years. To the neighbors, Anthony was quiet and reserved, often seen at backyard gatherings, rarely speaking. There were no public fights, no signs of abuse, no warnings. Nothing to suggest that on this day, something unspeakable would unfold. As Officer Foster approached the garage and peered through a small window, he saw the silhouette of a woman motionless, hair matted, one limp arm resting coldly on the concrete. He called out, but there was no answer. The door was locked. The silence pressed in harder. Moments later, Officer Taylor Webb arrived. Together, they knocked, shouted, pounded on the front door, but the house remained silent. Though trained to handle crises, something about this one felt different. It wasn't just hindsight was wrong. Minutes passed. No one opened the door. No movement. No sound. No crying child. No barking dog. Nothing. It was as if the house had been swallowed into a different realm where breath and life had already been taken. Sandra wasn't just another pregnant woman. She was a symbol of care and compassion, a beacon of hope for the children she taught. It was unthinkable that she, of all people, could be at the center of a gruesome, blood-soaked nightmare. And the most terrifying part, the officers still had no idea what they were walking into. Only one thing was certain beyond that locked door: something truly evil was waiting. The front door remained unresponsive. Officers Webb and Foster exchanged a glancea, silent agreement passed between them. Time was running out. Blood had already been spilled. The silence inside was a warning, one that screamed louder than any cry for help. They made the call force entry. Webb took the lead. He braced himself, stepped back, and kicked hard against the aging door frame. The door burst open with a crash. Inside, the hallway was dark and narrow, with only a thin sliver of daylight cutting through the still air. Foster followed closely, every muscle tense, gun raised, eyes sweeping each shadowy corner. Then, in an instant, they erupted. Gunfire shattered the silence, bullets tearing through the hallway like a scream. Webb took a hit. He collapsed at the threshold, his body crumpling without a sound. Foster reacted instinctively, diving backward, narrowly avoiding a second shot that sliced past his head by mere inches. The thunder of gunfire rang in his ears like a siren from some unseen inferno. From the ground, Foster tried to get a visual. In the split-second flash of muzzle light, he caught a glimpse of a figure darting across the staircase. Then, nothing. The shooter had vanished into the darkness. They had walked into a trap, and the person behind it knew this house like the back of their hand. Outside, backup had yet to arrive. Foster was alone, unsure if Webb was alive or dead. There was no signal, no movement. He didn't dare call out. Any sound could give away their position and invite another bullet. Then came a sound that stopped his heart. From deep inside the house, a voice echoed hoarse, raw, and filled with torment. "Just shoot me already." Foster froze. That voice, was it Anthony? Or a terrified hostage? Whoever it was, those words didn't belong to someone hoping to escape. They came from someone who had given up. A soul unraveling in real time. Foster swallowed hard, his mind spinning. He had seen many crime scenes before, but never one like this. A simple welfare check had turned into a death trap, a manhunt, a war zone. It felt like standing on the razor's edge between order and chaos, between justice and madness. If that really was Anthony shouting, then something inside him had broken. He wasn't just hurting others, she was spiraling into self-destruction. The distant wail of sirens pierced the air, snapping Foster back to the moment. Reinforcements were coming. But to Foster, every second felt like a lifetime. He stared at the Hausenot as a place of refuge, but as a pit of darkness swallowing every flicker of hope. And somewhere inside, his partner might be bleeding out. Sirens wailed through the tense silence, growing louder with each passing second. Reinforcements had arrived. Officers fanned out, weapons drawn, eyes scanning every angle of the house. But this wasn't a routine backup. It was a plunge into a battlefield with no clear lines. Somewhere inside, Officer Webb lay wounded or worse. Foster remained pinned down, unable to reach either his partner or the suspect. Every path forward could be a trap. Across the street, behind a neighbor's truck, Anetria crouched, trembling and barely holding herself together. Her phone vibrated. A message. The sender, Anthony. "I killed them. Don't let anyone in." Her eyes widened. The breath left her lungs in an icy rush. The words were short, cold, brutal. She nearly vomited on the spot. All doubt evaporated. This was no break-in, no accident. It was a premeditated massacre. And Anthony was the executioner. She immediately handed the phone to a nearby officer. The message was relayed to command. In that moment, every strategy on the table shifted. No one was going in blind anymore. They weren't just dealing with a shooter, they were facing someone who had likely taken hostages and was willing to kill again. From a legal standpoint, the text message was damning. By sending it, Anthony had not only admitted to murder, but also made direct threats creating terror among officers and civilians alike. It widened the scope of his crimes beyond homicide to include psychological terrorism, threatening law enforcement, and hostage-taking. Under Georgia law, any action intended to cause fear or panic, especially when involving deadly violence against authorities, can qualify as a charge of domestic terroristic threats. And if Aaron was still alive and being used as a bargaining chip, Anthony could face life without parole or capital punishment should that hostage not survive. But at that moment, the law was just the surface. What troubled the officers even more was Anthony's mindset. He wasn't running, he knew they were out there. Yet instead of surrendering, he sent a message, a declaration. "I know you're coming, and I'm ready to die with them." It wasn't just a warning, it was the cry of a man who had crossed the threshold of reason, a mind spiraling into its final collapse. This wasn't someone hoping to escape justice, this was someone inviting death. And inside that house, with at least one life still potentially clinging to existence, every second ticking by was a razor slicing into what fragile hope remained. The darkness inside the house swallowed any sense of time. For Webb, there were no more minutes or seconds, only the frantic beat of his heart and waves of searing pain pulsing through his body. A bullet had torn into his hip, and another had struck his chest. Only his vest had saved him, at least for now. The pain was spreading fast. Blood seeped from the wound, soaking through his uniform, leaving his skin clammy and cold. He couldn't remember how long he'd been lying there. Each moment blurred into the next, a silent battle between life and death. Somewhere outside, his team was surely trying to reach him, but he couldn't call out, couldn't make a sound. If he did, the shooter would know. And another bullet through the wall, the floor, anywhere might finish what the first ones hadn't. But Webb wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of leaving someone behind in that garage. He'd seen the body as he crawled through the hallway, dark hair draped across the floor, one blood-soaked arm reaching out. In those last seconds before collapsing, Webb knew it was Sandra. "I'm a cop," he whispered to himself, jaw clenched against the agony. "I don't leave people behind, not even when it's too late." He dug deep, forcing himself forward. Gritting his teeth, he dragged his body across the floor, his left hand braced against the wall, his right still gripping his weapon, not to fight, but to feel like a police officer still holding on. The garage was just ahead. The air reeked of blood. Sandra lay motionless, eyes closed, one hand resting on her swollen belly as if trying to shield the unborn child inside. Webb inched closer. One breath at a time, pain radiating through every muscle. "No pulse, she's cold," he murmured, eyes stinging. She was gone, and with her, the life of a child who never got the chance to take his first breath. Still, Webb didn't stop. He kept moving, because if he didn't make it out, no one would know what happened. No one would be able to tell Sandra's family that she hadn't died alone, that someone had tried to reach her, even if it was already too late. A faint sound behind him made his heart jump. A shadow darted past. He didn't know if it was Anthony or just a vision blurred by blood loss. He didn't turn to look. He couldn't. He had no time. Dizzy, Disoriented, his vision narrowed. His world began to dim around the edges. Every sound, every light, felt distant. Just get to the door, one more push. Pressing his chest to the floor, he crawled toward the garage door. But it was locked, sealed tight from the inside. He slammed his fist against it. Once, twice, 3 times. A hollow, desperate pounding. And then voices. "Webb, is that you? Webb?" He couldn't answer. His throat was too dry, his breath too short. Outside, Foster recognized the noise. He raced to the garage, yelling for tools. Within moments, a battering ram struck the door. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the air. Then light. And a bloodied arm reached out from the shadows. They pulled Webb out. He couldn't sit up. His breath came in ragged gasps. One hand clutched his bleeding hip. The other still held his gun. Officers swarmed around him, applying pressure to the wounds, working to keep him conscious until medics arrived. Webb turned his head, eyes drifting back to the garage where Sandra still lay. "I'm sorry, I was too late," he whispered. But no one blamed him. Because without Webb, no one would have known what had happened inside that house. No one would have known Sandra had died in silence. And no one could have told the tragic story that was just beginning to unfold from what seemed like an ordinary home into a wound that would never fully heal. The chaos outside the house was reaching its peak. Despite the arrival of additional officers, no one dared to approach too closely. The gunmen inside remained in control, and the Hausenau, a deadly fortress, could erupt with gunfire at any moment. Officer Keegan Merritt, one of the latest to arrive, quickly took position. He crouched behind a small tree near the front yard, clutching his AR-15, eyes locked on the darkened windows. Every movement, every sound from inside the house made his nerves tighten like a taut wire. Merritt knew the risk, but he couldn't back down. There might still be survivors inside. Aaron Sandra's teenage nephew hadn't been seen since the nightmare began. And Anthony, he could be waiting for someone to step through the door just to end this madness on his own terms. Then, a voice echoed from deep within the house, raspy, guttural, and chillingly certain. "Cops won't take me. I'll be the last one to walk out of here." Merritt's grip tightened on the rifle. His spine went cold. That wasn't a negotiation. That was a death sentence. The words carried like a storm front. This wasn't someone looking to escape. This was a man with nothing left to lose, someone ready to drag everyone down with him. Moments later, as Merritt leaned out to get a clearer angle through his scope, a flash lit up from an upstairs window. Then, crack! The bullet ripped through the air and slammed into his right hand. The shot was so powerful it nearly severed 2 fingers, forcing his hand to collapse, blood gushing instantly. Pain exploded through him, and Merritt dropped hard to the ground, teeth clenched to keep from screaming. Everything spun, his vision blurred. Still, he pushed backward, crawling, dragging his wounded arm behind him. Inch by inch, he edged toward the cover of the armored vehicle parked behind the house. Any second, another shot could ring out, and now fully exposed he was a sitting target. But death didn't take him. Not that day. Fellow officers pulled him behind cover, applying emergency pressure to the wound. A tactical medic rushed in to stabilize him, checking his pulse and slowing the bleeding. Merritt's face had gone pale, drenched in sweat, but he was still conscious, still holding on. Yet Merritt's injury was just the surface of the disaster. The situation had spiraled far beyond what regular patrol units could handle. 2 officers had now been wounded. No one knew how many people were still alive inside. And the shooter held every advantage, barricaded and armed, with full control of the battlefield. That's when the decision was made. Henry County Police issued an emergency signal. A SWAT unit was dispatched. Armored vehicles rolled into the neighborhood. A crisis negotiation team set up at the scene. Neighbors were evacuated. The entire block was sealed off. The standoff had officially begun. But inside that house, one man still gripped his weapon tightly, and he had vowed he would be the last one to leave. As evening settled over the neighborhood, shadows crept across every corner of the block under lockdown. A helicopter circled overhead, its spotlight cutting through the dimming light, beaming directly onto the rooftop where Anthony was still barricaded. Below, the SWAT team was in position, heavily armed, silent, and ready for whatever might come next. For nearly 3 hours, crisis negotiators had attempted every possible means of contact. They used loudspeakers, tried calling his phone, even played voice recordings of his family members desperate to get a response. But from inside the house, there was nothing. No reply. No footsteps. No gunshots. Just a suffocating silence, the kind that surrounds someone who has sealed himself off from the world. "Anthony, if you can hear us, let us help you." The lead negotiator called one final time, his voice steady but laced with urgency. Still, no answer. The hope for a peaceful resolution collapsed. SWAT received the go-ahead to escalate. Officers moved swiftly to the windows, smashing them open and launching tear gas inside. The canisters hissed as they detonated, white smoke flooding the hallway, the living room, every corridor within the house. The goal wasn't to harm it, was to flush Anthony out, to end the standoff without further bloodshed. But instead of surrendering, the house erupted with chaos. Furniture crashed, something slammed against a wall, shouts muffled and incoherent rose from the upper floor. Then, the audience watching this story unfold through the lens of investigation was shown a simulated clip from what appeared to be internal security camera footage inside the house. Grainy, black and white, and distorted by smoke, the video revealed Anthony pacing through the home, a gun clenched in his hand. His hair was disheveled, shirt stained with blood. He muttered to himself, eyes wide and frantic, like a man barely awake from a terrible dream. The footage jumped. Anthony stood still in the living room, facing a framed family photo on the wall. He hesitated, reached out and touched it. Then, gripped the gun tighter. His posture wasn't combative anymore. It was tormented, haunted by something deeper than rage. Another camera, positioned at the staircase, captured him collapsing to the floor, hands clutching his head. The tear gas overwhelmed him, triggering violent coughing fits. He dropped sideways, trembling, but still clung to the weapon as if it were the last thread holding his existence together. What the audience saw wasn't a man fighting others, it was a man being destroyed from the inside. And that's when SWAT command knew. If Anthony didn't come out in the next few minutes, they would have to go in. They were ready, but everyone understood. Once they entered that house, there was no turning back. Because what waited inside wasn't just an armed man. It was someone who had lost every reason to live. The front door shattered open with a crash of steel. SWAT officers, masked and armed, swept through the thick cloud of tear gas, flashlights slicing through the dim corridors. Every step was calculated. Every movement measured in seconds. A single misstep could cost a life. But inside, there was nothing. No gunshots. No shouting. No Anthony. The house was disturbingly quiet, so quiet, it felt like it had already consumed every trace of life. SWAT advanced through the ground floor, checking room by room. Empty. As they prepared to ascend the stairs, a soft click echoed above, not loud, but enough to freeze them in place. Then, a loud crash, something heavy, maybe a table, overturned from the second floor. And then, gunfire. A bullet tore through the stairwell, grazing the lead officer's shield and forcing the team to retreat. Anthony was still there, hiding, and he had no intention of surrendering. The order to pull back came quickly. The team withdrew before anyone could get hurt. The initial breach had failed. Outside, the rain had started. Not heavy but cold, sharp. Raindrops slid down the windshields of patrol cars, mixing with sweat and tension on the faces of officers standing guard. Gripping their weapons tighter, they never took their eyes off the dark, looming structure in front of them. At the 911 dispatch center, phones were ringing non-stop. Sandra's family had begun calling in, over and over. A woman's voice cracked over the line. "Please, can you tell me, is she still alive?" Another call came moments later, sobbing, desperate. "What about Aaron? Has anyone seen my grandson?" The dispatchers could only offer the same heartbreaking response. "We can't confirm anything yet. Officers are still working the scene." Every call was a knife twist, an agony with no answers. Loved ones outside, helpless. Someone inside, silent as stone. The scene shifted into stark contrast. On one side, SWAT officers huddled under dim lights, poring over blueprints of the house, discussing new breach points, faces tight with fatigue and determination. On the other, the house itself silent, still, black. Not a single light shining from any window. No movement. No sound. just a cold, dark shape standing in the rain like a tomb. Like a bottomless pit, silently waiting to swallow whatever hope remained. Time seemed frozen. The police couldn't go back in yet, the family couldn't reach their loved ones, and everyone else could only do one thing: wait. Wait for something no one wanted to name, but everyone feared was coming. The longer the silence stretched, the more terrifying it became. Anthony wasn't speaking. He hadn't responded to the gas. He hadn't fired again. He'd vanished into the house itself, as if he had melted into its walls, into the shadows, into the very floors beneath their feet. A young officer standing behind a truck whispered under his breath, "That house, it feels alive." No one replied, but their eyes said it all. They felt it too. From the outside, it looked like any two-story home. But now it wasn't a home. It was a crypt. A void. A place where sound and light went to Dion, maybe. Where hope would be buried too. At exactly 5:00 a.m., after more than 16 tense hours, SWAT received the final directive from command. Move in. There were no more options. No responses. No signs of life. No hope that anyone inside was coming out peacefully. This time, they didn't stop at the ground floor. One team breached through the back door. Another entered from the second story via the roof. Room by room, they swept the house. The sound of boots echoed through the hallways, heavy with urgency. And then the truth revealed itself, cold, brutal, and irreversible. Aaron White was found first. The 16-year-old lay on his bed in the upstairs bedroom, his lifeless body still, a fatal wound to his chest. There were no signs of struggle, no trails of blood elsewhere. He had either been shot in his sleep or the moment he awoke. The scene stunned even the most hardened officers. A boy with his entire future ahead of him stolen, just like that. Down in the garage, Sandra still lay where she had been seen hours earlier, her body unmoved, in the same position Webb had described, turned on her side, one hand resting on her belly, as if protecting the unborn child she would never meet. The room was ice cold. The blood on the concrete had dried into deep black stains, like scars etched into reality. Finally, they found Anthony Bailey Jr. in an upstairs bedroom, a handgun at his side. A single bullet wound to the left temple had ended the chaos in the most calculated way possible. There was no goodbye, no final words, just a lifeless body in a dark, sealed room, alone. And that's when investigators noticed something even more disturbing. Anthony had planned this. In the corner of the room, they discovered a laptop shut down, charger unplugged. The hard drive had been wiped clean, every file deleted. The home's internal security cameras, once positioned at the main entrance and hallway, had all been manually disabled the night before. Inside a drawer, crumpled and incomplete, was a sheet of paper with a few scribbled lines, possibly the beginnings of a suicide note. "I have nothing left. Don't try to understand me." The bedroom windows had been blacked out with blankets. Every door in the house had been locked from the inside using latches and metal braces, making forced entry nearly impossible. Anthony had turned the house into a trap-a-death maze designed not just to keep others out, but to ensure no one, not even himself, would walk away alive. His suicide brought no relief, only more questions. Why? Why would a man who once lived quietly in the community, trusted by those around him, plot something so horrific in such cold silence? There were no answers, just echoes. And that morning, in a house that once held the laughter and lives of 3 people, only 3 bodies remained. And a void no one would ever be able to fill. After the scene was secured and the victims identified, investigators began digging deeper into Anthony Bailey Jr.'s background. What they found chilled them. Contrary to the quiet, unassuming image he projected to neighbors, Anthony had a violent past. Several years earlier, he had been convicted of a serious domestic assault involving a former girlfriend. An incident so severe the victim was hospitalized with broken bones and psychological trauma. But due to limited evidence and the victim's reluctance to testify further, Anthony received a suspended sentence and was ordered to complete an anger management program. The case quietly faded from public view. But the most alarming detail wasn't what he had done, it was what hadn't been done afterward. Despite his conviction, Anthony never had his firearms confiscated. In Georgia, gun control laws contain dangerous loopholes. Even with a history of violence, he was legally allowed to keep his weapon and, worse yet, could have easily purchased another one without being flagged. The state has no centralized system for weapon retrieval post-conviction. There's no enforcement body to ensure offenders like Anthony are disarmed. So he walked free. And armed. Investigators were furious. They weren't just dealing with the consequences of a man who lost control, they were confronting the collapse of a legal system that had willfully turned a blind eye to an obvious threat. How did this happen? The answer lies in the disconnect between policy and reality. Georgia is one of the most permissive states in the country when it comes to firearms. There is no requirement for gun registration, no obligation to report ownership transfers, and in many cases, misdemeanor convictions don't even make it into the National Background Check Database, the very system that gun dealers rely on to screen buyers. That means thousands of people with criminal records are still legally armed. Anthony was one of them. A ticking time bomb, living quietly among others until the moment he exploded. Reporters began asking tough questions. Who sold Anthony his weapon? Why hadn't his prior conviction appeared in any database? And more critically, how many more like him are still out there? The outrage wasn't just in the press. Sandra's family, who once believed she was safe with a man who seemed stable, now faced the brutal truth. The law had indirectly contributed to her death. If there had been a warning system, if there had been a mandatory weapon seizure process following conviction, maybe, just maybe, Sandra and Aaron would still be alive. But maybe isn't good enough. Time can't be reversed. The dead cannot be brought back. And in that context, the house where this massacre occurred became more than a crime scene. It became a symbol, a reflection of a broken system. A system that was disjointed, outdated, and too slow to stop someone who had been waving red flags for years, while no one listened. Anthony didn't snap. He planned. He locked the doors. He disabled the cameras. He drafted a suicide note. And above all, he held a legal firearm he had owned for years, without interruption or intervention. It was a catastrophic lesson, one written in blood. 1 week after the massacre, in a quiet park on the south side of Stockbridge, the community gathered beneath the soft afternoon sun. On the grass, 3 picture frames sat side by side, a photo of Sandra, smiling gently in a light blue dress, a portrait of Aaron, grinning proudly in his football uniform, and one empty frame stitched with the name Antonio in silver thread against a white cloth. No one would ever know if Antonio had his mother's eyes or his cousin's smile. He never took his first breath, never felt the warmth of a cradle, never heard his name spoken aloud. And yet, in the stillness of that afternoon, his presence was deeply felt, a tiny soul, never born, but never forgotten. The memorial was simple, no music, no speeches, just neighbors standing side by side, holding hands, sharing the weight of a loss the town still struggled to comprehend. They spoke of Sandra stopping her car in the rain to help a student tie their shoes, of Aaron's first goal on the school soccer field, of Antonio's dreams he would never have the chance to form. But amid the sorrow came a deeper truth. Domestic violence doesn't always look like bruises or screams. Sometimes it hides in long silences, in icy stares, in controlled text messages, shadowed glances, altered routines. It doesn't always arrive with warning signs. Sometimes it's just a feeling and unease we can't quite name, and if we're not paying attention, it can turn deadly just as it did for Sandra, Aaron, and Antonio. This isn't just a story about a man who lost control. It's a story about missed chances, overlooked signals, systemic failures we didn't fix in time. If you watching this right now sense that someone you know is being controlled, isolated, or silenced, don't wait. Don't assume it's nothing. Don't stay quiet. Speak up. One voice could save a life. One small act might stop something unimaginable. And if someone needs help, be the first to notice. As the video nears its end, the screen slowly fades to black, leaving only the image of the white cloth frame stitched with the name Antonio. Beneath it, a single line appears. The baby who was never born, but whom the world will never forget. The light dims, the sound fades, and the audience is left with one question echoing in the silence. Have we been listening when someone has no voice left to speak?